So, Wena Supernaw.
Excellent. And give me your official title.
Chairperson of the O-Gah-Pah Nation Business Committee.
Thank you so much. And give me your favorite flavor of ice cream.
I don't like ice cream.
Oh, okay, okay.
Actually, I like it. It doesn't like me very much. So I gave it up about 20 years
I
ago.
think we're all actually a little lactose intolerant. We just deny
Yeah.
it. We just tell ourselves we're not.
Yeah, and then eat it anyway.
Exactly.
But when I did used to eat ice cream, I liked mint chocolate.
Mint chocolate. Now,
Yeah.
did you like the white mint chocolate or the green mint
Oh, it's got to
chocolate?
be green.
It's got to be green. That food coloring really sells it.
Exactly.
Excellent.
They'll find out someday that that green is probably,
Let's not
really
think about that.
toxic.
Yeah, let's not
But
think about that right now. All right. Go ahead and just tell me some of the tribal nations you are a citizen of.
so the O-Gah-Pah Nation as well as the Osage Nation.
Excellent. And feel free to go back one generation. Feel free to go back 10 generations if you want to. But if you could give me some lineage, a mother's side, father's side, going back, as far as O-Gah-Pah is concerned, where would you like to go?
Sure. I'll start with my dad. He went by Junior. His name was Lawrence Anderson Supernaw Jr. So there's a senior in there as well. But unfortunately, Dad died 12 years ago, and O-Gah-Pah Osage. And then his dad was Ick Supernaw. It's Lawrence Anderson Supernaw Sr. I know it's a mouthful. And then his mother was Grandma Supernaw. That's my great-grandmother. And her father, Tall Chief, was the last hereditary chief of the O-Gah-Pah tribe. Before him was Lame Chief. And then I get a little confused beyond that, but, with notes I can go back 8 generations.
That's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Off the top is exactly what we're looking for right now. Let's go ahead and start with just your childhood. And this is really a kind of pick your own adventure on what you want to talk about. But when you think about childhood memories, whether it be the powwow or just things you learned around the dinner table or anything like that, what are some childhood memories you have growing up specifically where you're learning about O-Gah-Pah and culture?
I remember one of the earliest stories my dad used to tell me was basically the story about how we became the downstream people. And the way he told the story was a little bit different than what I've read, since then. But the whole notion of the O-Gah-Pah, the Ponca, Ka, Osage, Omaha, and O-Gah-Pah being together before that. But when they crossed a river, and when I was a kid, of course, I didn't know what the Mississippi River was versus the White River versus Arkansas or Ohio or anything else. But the whole idea was we came upon a river, and the rafts that were being used or the canoes that were tied together, those ties, those ropes broke, and the O-Gah-Pah went downstream. So I always knew we were the downstream people. Just probably spent a lot of years not being able to explain it very well to other people. But it's one of my favorite stories that Dad used to tell us when we were kids all the time. So we always knew where we came from.
When you were a kid, did you try to picture that river in your head? I mean,
Oh, absolutely. Couldn't read. I couldn't read at the time. So you always picture it. And, I've heard stories since then about how, how much movement there was with the water and how dangerous it was. And, why we got separated and why it was so sad because we got separated from the rest of our O-Gah-Pah kin. But those stories I absolutely love. And stories about, when he was a kid, when they were still over at Devil's Promenade. And then the years that our powwow, which was really a picnic for a long, long time, but when they used to dance over at Tall Chief's land. And my grandma Supernaw and her oldest daughter, Aunt Mary, I've never seen any pictures of this, but there was some sort of a wooden structure that they used to sit on for the powwow. But by that time, it wasn't a picnic anymore. It was always a gathering, a way to bring everybody together, not just for the O-Gah-Pah, but other tribes too that were so helpful in taking care of us when we didn't have anything, didn't have any food to eat. The Ottawas were a big part of that. And just those stories about how it was always a time of coming together and being together from all the nations up here, as well as far away. So very, very good memories.
Yeah. You gave me about 8 things to unpack in that one answer. So I'm going to try to break it down. One of the things you talked about, we've had a lot of people talk about that story of going downstream. you mentioned how the sadness behind that story. Or I have it factually plenty of times, but I haven't really had anybody focus on the tragedy of it. So if you could just take your time and just as a kid when you're hearing that story, just kind of remember or tell me about the sadness that's associated with that.
Well, primarily because we were all together for many, many generations, and who knows how many generations that was. And then all of a sudden, the people that you were the closest with, the ones that you relied upon, and everybody, depended upon each other, and then all of a sudden being separated from your extended family. And that's still how I think about all of those tribal nations as well. I always refer to them as, some of our Dayuha kin, that somehow, some way, we'll be together again.
Yeah. And then one of the things we're trying to unpack is just the tragedy, the oppression and the suppression that's happened over the years. One of the things that you mentioned is how the tribe was in a state of need, and that was a big part of the history. Would you mind, pretend I'm a 7-year-old and you're trying to explain, just historically speaking, some of the harder times that O-Gah-Pah has gone through?
So I kind of think of this as periods of homelessness, if you will. So in 1818, when we ceded 30 million acres of our ancestral homeland, all of Arkansas, parts of Louisiana, Missouri, and Oklahoma, we were relegated to about 2 million acres in the area really around Little Rock. And then due to really increased pressure, the need or the want of people of European descent wanting that rich farmland. It was only 6 years later that we lost all of our land, those remaining 2 acres. So that was in 1824. At that point, it took them a few years, but they marched the O-Gah-Pah down to the Red River onto Caddo land. And unfortunately, by that point, there was really only about a third of the tribe left. So, European contact was in or around 1673. And so we lost 2/3 of the tribe simply due to exposure to other forces, primarily disease. So by the time we got down to the Red River, there weren't nearly as many of us. The Caddo didn't know that we were coming. The local governmental agent didn't know that the O-Gah-Pah were coming, and they put us on a piece of land that was highly prone to flooding. And after planning for 3 seasons, of course, kept getting flooded out, starvation, more disease, and so the numbers dwindled even further. And it was at that point that Saracen, basically, who still had land in Arkansas, because he was of mixed blood, so he could actually own land, took a lot of the O-Gah-Pah back to Arkansas, to his land, until 1833, when the treaty was signed that basically designated the O-Gah-Pah Reservation here in Oklahoma. Now, during all this time, not only are the numbers dwindling, starvation is taking place, but the O-Gah-Pah scattered. There were a lot of O-Gah-Pah that didn't go back to Arkansas. They went to Texas, and at that point, there was, at least politically, some acceptance for the O-Gah-Pahs, Cherokee. There were a lot of different tribes that kind of, disbanded and went to Texas. There was also a group that lived with the Choctaw and then later with the Muskogee Creek on the Canadian River. So we were scattered. Took them a few years to get us up here to Oklahoma. And then not long after that, they figured out, due to a survey mistake, we had settled on land that was not designated for the O-Gah-Pah. And so those improvements, if you will, were lost, had to move. And then not long after that, the Civil War took place. Both the North came through, the O-Gah-Pah scattered primarily to what's current-day Kansas. And then the South came through. All the improvements were destroyed. All the livestock was gone. And so you hear these stories of homelessness, others taking us in. At that point, a large number of the O-Gah-Pah went to Osage, Tall Chief, my great-great-grandfather being one of them. And a lot of O-Gah-Pahs were there. At one point, there were only about 33 O-Gah-Pah here, in the reservation boundaries. And with that few numbers, it's no wonder that we probably lost about 20 of our clans. A lot of our traditional culture got basically intercepted because everybody had to focus on just sheer survival. And it was usually based on the generosity and the kindness of other tribes. So it wasn't until 1890, and that was the year that all the Quapaw had to come back because the Dawes Allotment Act had already been passed in, what was it, 1867. So we had to come back in 1890 in order to be eligible for allotment, and that didn't get completed until 1897. So I know I'm going through a lot of history, but I think that history is really relevant when you talk about, you know, they have these like really complex words, you know, dispersion and is it diaspora or something like that. I probably didn't even say it right. But homelessness and being forced to abandon the old way for some new way. And of course, nobody knew what those new ways were. And I think ever since then, we've been trying to hold on to what little bit we still have left. And that's why, you know, that's the most important, I think, responsibility we have in the current generations is to hold on to whatever it is we have from the past so that we can make it relevant and living and breathing going forward. That's a lot of hardship to overcome for a single people. And we were never that huge to begin with, even, you know, at the time of European contact. They really, you know, some of the stories say that there were as many as 10 to 20,000 Quapaw. Those numbers are probably inflated. But even at that time, that's not that many. It really isn't, especially if you compare it to current day enrollment, which is right at about 6,000. So it's taken us that long from dwindling to, you know, a couple hundred to get us to 6,000.
As always, so much to unpack from that answer. Thank you so much for that. I'd like to just unpack just a few things you just said. One of the things is when they were first moved in 1818, I just want to unpack a little bit more because some people may think, well, land is land. Like they were in this land, they're going to this land. It's probably the same. One of the things that I want to bring home is just how fertile, how good that land was that they were originally at. So if you could just, you know, the original land, paint a picture for me of what that land, in general terms, what that land was like and why they picked to move there.
So that area of Arkansas, right at the confluence of the White Arkansas and Mississippi rivers, is really rich, really Mississippi Delta ground. So that is prime farmland. Matter of fact, even at the current time, they still log a lot, you know, further south of there. And then that area in between really Pine Bluff all the way to Little Rock is just really fertile soil. So hunting, fishing, crops, I mean, all of that was plentiful. And of course, you know, like a lot of tribal nations, they would migrate based on where the hunting was the best, and that's why there's so much overlap in a lot of the land areas by the tribes. But if you compare that, there's a reason that the tribes were put into Indian country. Nobody else wanted it. So nobody, I mean, if you've ever tried to farm here at the Quapaw Reservation, it's not an easy task because of really the rock, whether it's flint or shale or whatever happens to be here. I'm no geologist, but the point is, farming is really quite difficult. There's not a lot of topsoil. Hay being the most plentiful. You know, at one point this was considered to be the hay capital of the world. So, you know, it's very different in terms of, one, the Europeans didn't want it, and number two, they wanted that land in Arkansas, and nothing was going to stop until they pushed us out of there.
Well said. Thank you so much. You'd mentioned the generosity of other tribes, and all I'm really looking for is sort of a laundry list of any of the tribes that you know that were generous in those times. Do you know any of those? Okay, go ahead.
Sure. Osage, Caddo, Cherokee, Choctaw. Those are probably the ones that are most immediately, you know, and I don't know if I mentioned Caddo, but they're still, we wouldn't have had any place to go in 1835 had it not been for the Caddo. So, you know, I think that kind of story repeats itself. And then, of course, the Ottawa up here. By the time we were up here, all the difficulties that we were going through in that post-Civil War era, the Ottawas had a huge role in helping us.
This is speculation. Maybe it isn't that much of a speculation, but why? Why were there so many other tribes willing to help throughout the years? Why was that something that was so prevalent?
Just my own opinion, but I think most of those tribal nations had their own stories and own similar circumstances, and perhaps, just perhaps, other tribal nations helped them. So it's that similarity and those parallels in the stories, I would think, would have impacted their thinking at that time. But that's speculation on my part.
Sure,
so.
But I'm sure.
But the Osage were our O-Gah-Pah kin, so that's an even stronger relationship. The languages were the same up through a particular point in time. So.
Sure. Okay. I know we're summarizing a great deal of history right now, but maybe one of the next chapters would be the interactions with the Catholic schools and what happened there. So pretend to know nothing about it. How would you tell a 7-year-old, what happened with Catholic schools? Why youth from Wena were going to Catholic schools and everything like that?
Well, primarily because St. Mary's was here. Part of that's the Catholic 40 that's right next door. The whole idea was for a school to be built here within the Wena Reservation. So that's part of it, but it also involved, there were a couple of other schools that was at the Osage Labor School, I think that's right, where the whole idea was to send Wena kids to these other schools so that they would learn skills and be able to bring that back and, just from an educational standpoint. Unfortunately, those experiments, if you will, failed miserably. There are 2 stories out there where there were 2 Quapaws that were sent to I think it was called the Osage Trade School. One of them came back, couldn't speak Quapaw, couldn't speak any other language. What that poor child had to endure, I'll never understand. And then the other one just basically ran away so many times he got lost. So just whether it's Catholic schools or other kind of trade schools that the government was trying to assimilate, which is a code word for annihilate, but to assimilate the youth, were miserable failures. But as far as the school here at St. Mary's, there were a lot of people that received good quality educations because of that. So it's not all evil and all bad. I mean, there were some good things that came out of it. Not many, but the reality of being forced to go far away from home, away from everything that you knew, had to have been a horrible tragedy. But at least at St. Mary's, it was local enough that hopefully it wasn't as bad an experience, but you weren't taken so far away from your family.
That's extremely fascinating, because the juxtaposition of how it wasn't all evil, it wasn't this, but also that assimilation is annihilation. Mm-hmm. Like there's those 2 different warring thoughts there. If you could just unpack that just a little bit more, because we have had conversations where it's basically evil. Like it not use those words, but that it was nothing but irreparable harm, which there is that as well. But you see, at least to a smallest degree, that there was either good intention or an attempt to better the culture. Do you see that?
To some extent. I'll give you a slightly different story, and it's not with the Wena, but with the Osage. Had it not been for the Catholic priests, the Osages would have lost their mineral rights, their oil rights. The only reason that they retained the mineral rights in common is simply because of the advice and counsel provided by the Catholic priests. The government kept running them across the border back into Kansas, and the priests would come back. So, I'm not trying to paint it. It's not that simplistic a picture, and it's not all reservation school story either. There's some good in there as well in terms of opportunities and advice and counsel that in some cases actually turned out to be pretty positive for a people. Just might not have been the Wena story.
Right, that's well said. And then that'd be the next part of that answer, is just talking about what assimilation did to the culture, and really unpacking, the suppression of the language. And would you just, I pretend I don't know anything about it, but how did the Catholic schools address language and even culture as a whole when it came to Waupaw?
So I don't know so much about, all of the schools, but just from what I've been told and what I've read, they weren't allowed to speak their native language. And language is the way that we formulate thoughts. It teaches us how to analyze, how to reason. And by altering or disassociating the language, you actually change the way people think, the way that they incorporate new information and learn and apply that to situations around them. And I think it's had a huge impact. And this might come out as kind of negative, and I don't mean it entirely that way. But there were a lot of, even people I can remember, that discouraged the young ones from learning Quapaw because they were trying to protect us. They were trying to teach us to think about a differing future. And in a lot of ways, I hate to blame the earlier generations, although it's hard not to do that, but they were really trying to protect us and trying to give us a differing future, a differing outcome than they could have hoped for. So it's awful hard to blame someone for that. And I don't think it's a single generation. There were multiple generations. Because I remember when I was a kid, Grandma Supernaw was still alive. And I love listening to the recordings that we do have available, because that lyrical Quapaw voice is so beautiful. It's almost like singing in a lot of ways. But she was the last one, until some of the younger generations really carried that torch forward. And I'm very, very thankful for that. But she didn't teach any of her kids to be fluent in Quapaw. One of her grandsons actually became fluent, but he's the only one that I'm aware of. But nobody was encouraged, because I think they were trying to, in their way, they were trying to get us to pursue a different future. And maybe that's a part, there's no way they could have foreseen at that point what we lost as a result. I mean, I think their intentions were good, but schools didn't help. Even our own, I'm not talking about the current day elders, but a couple of generations before them, they didn't help either.
And do you think they were trying to assimilate, basically, by not teaching the language? Were they trying to say, you need to push more into culture?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You need to kind of become more like everybody else, whether it was education, whether it was language, math, the way we lived. And I'm not saying this is true across the board. I can only speak from my own personal experience when I was a youngster, and it's not like anybody was overtly, discouraged. It wasn't encouraged either. That's an answer as well. So sometimes that's what people don't say and what they don't do that's much more powerful than what they say and what they do.
Right. And they placed a larger emphasis on the success of their children, which they thought was going to be attributed by assimilating with the culture, than they did on teaching language and culture of the Quapaw.
Right. That's why it's, what we do have left, it's our gift, it's our responsibility, and we have to do everything that we can to help strengthen. I hate to use the word preserve, because language is like everything else. It continues to evolve and change over time. We have to let it, knowing full well it's not going to be the same way as it was back in the 17 and 1800s.
So much to unpack. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but actually let's just go naturally into the future. You kind of just touched on this a little bit, but when you think about the future, when you think about the culture, Quapaw culture thriving, what are some elements that you would like to see the culture embrace and really take to the next level?
So one area has to do with the clans. Like I said, by about 1900, we'd probably lost 20 of the clans. I mean, we do have some that exist, but there are a lot of Quapaws today that do not know what clan they belong to or how it's passed, whether it's matrimonial or patrimonial. And different tribes are different, so I think that's a component of it, intertwined with a revived language program, primarily focused on the kids, because the people, my generation, we're kind of lost. There's a limit to what language skills I can learn at this stage in life. I can, learn a word or a phrase here and there, but fluency is probably beyond me at this stage in life. But these kids that are like sponges, that's where we have to start. And when they go home and they're speaking to everybody in Quapaw, and then forcing everybody else in their household to learn as well, that's how you really revive and generate new and reinvigorated interest in it. So language, getting our signage updated so that we're surrounded by Quapaw words and phrases all around us. I think that's how we can move things forward.
Do you mean like road signs, that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll unpack that, because we just got back from Ireland, where you travel to
and it's in Irish.
It's in Irish, yeah, in Gaelic, yeah. And so it's like, that's fascinating. So that's something you'd like to see? You unpack that, like I don't know what you're talking about.
So there are a lot of places in Indian country where the signage is in both the native language, whoever's reservation that's on, as well as in English. And that's what I'd like to see, here within the reservation boundaries. I'm just happy that they're, it's nice when you see references to O-Gah-Pah instead of Quapaw, which is, an anglicized version of the real word. But the more we can kind of surround ourselves with that, I think the more intrigued kids become. And again, I think it's all about the kids. So someday, let's start inventing Quapaw words for trigonometry, right? If we really want to do immersion schools, that's how you take a language forward, right? It's not just, the words and the phrases for cooking or physical objects, but it's also abstract items too. And there are tribes that have been able to do that, so that you can, what is cosine and cogent in Quapaw. It might actually make sense to me if we did it in Quapaw, but
There you
sure.
go. Wrap your mind around it better that way. I could talk to you all day. Let's go with, because you obviously have a strong lineage, and one of the things we're trying to grab is just people that meant a lot to you, people that you really looked up to, and this can be familial, it can be anybody really, but are there a few? Are there people that you looked up to and really gleaned a lot of knowledge from?
Yes. Not all of whom were Quapaw, because, when you're here, we're surrounded by 8 other tribes. And because we've all been here for so long, not only have the families intermarried, which I think is a beautiful thing, but also other people from the other tribes having a huge, impact on the way we see Native life, period. And one of those people is Winky Barnes. Not Quapaw, but I know very, very close to my family in many ways. I admired her a great deal. She's got probably the most fascinating and insidious senses of humor I've ever been around. She's one of my favorite people. So.
Excellent. Are there any, as we go through these questions, has it jogged your memory in any other direction or anything else you'd like to talk about? I know that's an abstract question that doesn't really have, so don't feel like there's a wrong, but if there's anything you can think of when it comes to Quapaw culture, the past, the future, and where the tribe is headed, is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
Sure. I'd like to, because we scattered so many times, over multiple generations in the last few hundred years, I would like for us very much to focus on building reasons for people to come home, right? I did not grow up here in Quapaw. I grew up in Skiatook in Osage County. There are a lot of Quapaws in Osage County, right on the Quapaw Creek. So, those ties are really deep. But when I think about Quapaw and we have so many talented, well-educated, hardworking Quapaws that are scattered throughout the country. You know, sure, we've got a couple of casinos here. We've got, career opportunities within the government. I would like to see us focus more on other businesses, whether it's in science and technology and things of that nature, coupled with housing, which is a big, I think, barrier for a lot of people to move here, period, to move back here. I think those things together, we can give people a lot of reasons to be here and live within the Quapaw Reservation. Not because it's part of a Superfund site, but because this is a wonderful, beautiful place. And there's no better way to just continue our culture and our traditions. It's awfully difficult to do that when people are scattered all over the country. But giving people more reasons and more family-oriented and future-oriented reasons to move home.
And workshop this with me, because I'm not sure where we're going, but I love what you're saying about how over and over and over the Quapaw people have been scattered for a multitude of reasons, starting with the first time when the line broke and they went downstream.
Yeah.
Would you mind, and you're gonna have to rehash a couple of your answers here, but would you mind just explaining that to me? Like, are the Quapaw people that have been scattered over and over and over again?
They have absolutely been scattered over and over again, based on treaties that were struck back in the 1800s, as recently as the Civil War, and then even the Allotment Act. By the time we allotted in 1897, mining has done its dirty business on our land here too. All reasons that the Quapaw had a lot of reasons to move away from one another, and now it's time to focus on giving Quapaws reasons to move back home and to be with one another.
Phenomenal answers. Final question, unless you want to talk about anything else. Final question is, over and over and again during these interviews, we've seen this theme where there was the tragedies of the past, the oppression and suppression of the culture, and then there was a time of stability, and what we're starting to see is a time of thriving again, and a time where young people are dreaming about going off and doing things, and there's this beautiful arc that's happening right now. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but do you feel that way? Do you feel that vibe going on culturally at Quapaw?
Yeah, I do. I'll just use myself as an example. My family moved away from Oklahoma for a better life, stronger careers, better jobs, greater prosperity. And I spent my professional career away from here and made a decision that I wanted to move back home. I wanted to be with the Quapaw people because that is home. Shoot, they could scatter us to the Four Corners someplace else, and I'm still going to follow right along because I want to be with my Quapaw kin. So, and I think that's pretty much the same for everybody. We're yearning for something that's missing. And what we've got to do is hopefully help fill those gaps. And we can't do it by ourselves, off in a corner or writing a master's thesis. We have to do it together. And we have to do it in the uniquely Quapaw way. And there are a lot of discussions about what the Quapaw way really is, but that's what we figure out. But we can only do that by being together. The only way we're going to actually find not only economic prosperity, but cultural prosperity as well, is together, not by people living hither, thither, and yon. And that's one of the few things I've actually learned in my life.
I think you learned maybe a few more than that, but is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
No, I think that's it.
Anything? Oh, we're stopping for a picture? You good? Thank you so much.
Callie, I can't see you. I just know you're moving about. She's moving about.
There's so many people who have not wanted to put their glasses off. They're like,